All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Oliver Gilbert, the Vice Chairman of the Miami-Dade County Board of County Commissioners and the Chair of the Miami-Dade TPO and the Chair of SEFTC. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this workshop this morning. I know it says that I'm going to have 10 minutes to speak, but I'm not taking 10 minutes because I think that we all know why we're here. We're here to review the type of transportation, the type of regional transportation needs we need and goals that we have and how we can actually best learn, understand, and work together. I appreciate everyone who's in attendance. I appreciate my colleagues on the board. And now I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, good morning. Beam Fur with Broward County.
And Member Pinto. Mayor, are you on?
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, Fred Pinto from Palm Beach County.
All right, good morning, you all. And I see next on the agenda is Commissioner Bean. This is where looking at my phone becomes the issue.
The next should be Broward Workshop, Randall Vitale.
There you go.
I'll help you out here.
Thank you.
So Chair Gilbert, if you don't mind, let's do a little house cleaning for our 150 attendees.
Okay.
So I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this. The recording will be made available after the meeting. All the presentations will also be put up after the meeting. And for those who have, when we get to the question and answer section, which will happen during our break time, to please use the Q&A section. We will try to answer as many questions live as possible. But for those we don't get to, we will record it and we'll get back to you with an email or some other follow-up throughout.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I see Chief Morales is on here. Hi, Jimmy.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair.
Good morning. All right, so now we're on to Greg from the Broward NPO. Greg.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm not Greg, Greg Stewart this morning.
Sorry, Mr. Cross, we're going to back up a little to Mr. Vitale. So for those of you who don't know, Randall Vitale is the president of Hoffman's Chocolate, previously spending 17 years in banking as a market executive leading teams throughout South Florida. In the community, Randall currently serves as the co-chair of the Transportation Committee of the Broward Workshop, chair of the Transportation Surtax Appointing Authority, chair of the Coastal Link Coalition in Broward, and co-chair of the Transportation Pillar of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance Prosperity Partnership.
Okay.
He's going to open us up with a few words in the business community. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. If I had known that whole thing would have been read, I would have made it a lot shorter. Sorry about that, everybody.
That was the edited version.
Good morning. But that was very much the edited version. Good morning, everybody. As mentioned, I'm Randall Vitale, and I'm here representing the Broward Workshop and the business community at large in South Florida. Broward Workshop is a 40-year-old organization that is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan group of over 100 business leaders and decision makers here in Broward County. We represent tens of thousands of employees, and we want to encourage everyone to be engaged today and participate in this incredible discussion. And we know how important it is, not just for transportation and congestion, but also for economic development and for housing and so many other things that a great commuter rail along the FEC line will provide. A little bit about the Coastal Link Coalition, which you'll see in the on the PDF there. BrowardWorkshop.com/rail is where you can learn a little bit more about the Coastal Link Coalition in Broward. This is an organization that was started by Albert Garcia with the Wynwood Business Improvement District in Miami, and we've now taken it up to Broward, and our responsibility is singular in focus, and that is to, so many business groups are focusing on so many topics, and myself included, but this group, the Coastal Link Coalition, is really singular in focus, and that is advocacy to make sure that this project continues to move forward so that we can have commuter rail on the FEC line throughout South Florida. And so there are over 50 organizations, businesses, cultural organizations, and great organizations like the Miami Dolphins, who are in the middle of the NFL draft right now, and so many other organizations that have committed to this initiative. And if you'd like to learn more about it, go to browardworkshop.com/rail and sign up to get our updates, and I'll be sure to reach out to you and see how you can get engaged. So with that, I will turn it back over and look forward to hearing from all the great panelists today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Bill Cross. He is the Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Policy for the Broward MPO. In this role, he's responsible for the long-range multimodal transportation planning, transportation programs, city services, and data services. He is a professional engineer registered in the state of Florida and holds a bachelor's degree of science in civil engineering and a master's of business administration. Mr. Cross has over 25 years of progressive public sector management experience. Mr. Cross.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here this morning. I am standing in for Greg Stewart, our Executive Director at the Broward MPO. He was unable to attend this morning due to another conflict, but I'm certainly pleased to stand in for him this morning. And of course, some of you may or may not know me and my history, but I spent much of the last 10 years over with Tri-Rail. So the irony is not lost on me that I'm going to provide you a little history of this project this morning, since I was right there, witnessed much of it. So next slide, please. And we'll continue on. Okay, so again, I was asked to provide the group just a little bit of history so that as we're thinking about where we want to go, we can understand where we came from. So let me start all the way back, really at kind of the beginning of the development of Florida. So, you know, this is not a new idea, providing passenger rail on the Florida East Coast. And it actually, by 1894, there was already rail service down to West Palm, and many of you there from Palm Beach, I'm sure, recognize the breakers. This was one of the hotels that Flagler built on his system. Next slide, please. And so, you know, I wanted to start at this point because I think many of the things that were really compelling for Flagler back in the day are the same reasons why this is a good idea today. You know, passenger rail obviously has a role in transportation and moving people, but it goes beyond that. A key element for Henry Flagler was opening up land and the land development that goes along with that. And then, of course, there was an economic motive, and still today, there's large economic rewards associated with the development of passenger rail in this corridor. There was a study done, it's probably almost 10 years old now, but it showed literally a couple $2 billion worth of economic activity would come from a project like this. And finally, there's an issue of equity. I think that's on most people's minds today. And we know that this corridor serves a whole series of historic downtowns that some are economically underserved areas, and they would too benefit from this type of service. Next slide, please. Okay, so, you know, bringing us forward to more modern times, you know, when did this really get started? Well, it was back in the early 2000s when there were a series of studies that started out in the corridor. Palm Beach started to look at maybe extending Tri-Rail up on what was known as the Jupiter extension, which would require crossing over onto the FEC rails. Miami-Dade, back in 2002, passed their half-penny sales tax. The pennies, I guess it was the People's Transportation Plan. So they started thinking about and looking at what they called the Northeast Corridor, which is the FEC corridor. And others started to look at this corridor as well. And the owner at the time of the FEC corridor asked that all the different government agencies look to consolidate these studies into a single regional study. And so all the MPOs got together along with DOT and agreed that DOT would be the right party to lead that overall regional study. Next slide, please. So for the period from 2004 through 2010, this is really the time when DOT was studying and developing an overall system master plan. You can see here DOT held over 400 public meetings. There was a lot of outreach. There was a lot of work done looking at the corridor. And it wasn't just rail. They looked at all of the opportunities in the corridor at that time. And a couple key findings was that a local bus system up and down US 1 really wasn't the right solution for the longer regional trips, but that it was supportive of keeping the bus service more local on US 1, but FEC could provide a regional trip that was time competitive with the auto. And that was a key goal of the DOT study, was to make sure that they were developing a rail system that could compete from a time standpoint with an automobile-based trip. And of course, they did get resolutions of support from 2 of the 3 MPOs for the results of that study. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was also an important time, 11 and 12. DOT came back and took kind of a second look at their master plan and realized that they had identified perhaps too many stations. I think there was over 50 in the original master plan. And most importantly, they came back and they focused the number of stations down to about 25 at that time. And that was a big effort to do that. Also, All Aboard Florida at that time, in that period, announced that they were going to provide service from Miami to Orlando. And then in parallel to that, SFRTA presented a fast start plan for a tri-rail coastal service to the SFRTA board. Next slide, please. 2013, I'm going to say, was an important year in the overall study efforts. This was the point at which there was an overall memorandum of understanding agreed to by both DOT, SFRTA, as well as the regional planning councils, the 3 MPOs, on how to move as a region the study forward. And so you can see there that DOT was really left with the lead role for the early project development. And then RTA had different roles, including trying to find the funding. And then the regional planning councils were leading the public outreach. Next slide, please. So from 14 to 18, again, there were some things going on, but I'm going to say some progress slowed a little bit in this period. But the MPOs had initially approved for DOT and SFRTA to request entry into project development with FTA. But then shortly thereafter, FTA and FRA agreed to put that on hold to avoid confusion with the efforts of All Aboard Florida. And then shortly after that, Brightline actually started their revenue service from Miami to West Palm Beach. Next slide, please. Also during this period, and I think it's sometimes forgotten, but RTA was able to successfully negotiate with FEC access on their rail corridor into downtown Miami. And while that service is not yet actually in place, the agreements and the rail corridor access is in place. So that was a very important thing that happened during that time frame. Miami-Dade continues to explore perhaps just the Northeast corridor portion and moving that forward. And then most importantly here, I think, I have to point out that Broward in 2018 passed a transportation surtax. And throughout the study history, the single most challenging item to figure out and sort out was the funding. And not so much the capital funding, because variable grants and such, it was always the operating funding. So I point out the surtax here in Broward County because perhaps that finally unlocks that puzzle of the operating funding. Next slide. And I'll leave you here today as you get started on the rest of your conversations with a quote that we heard from FTA back when we were entering project development. Coastal Link is the best opportunity for a new commuter rail service in the nation. I believe that probably still stands true today. So again, on behalf of the Broward MPO, welcome. I think you've got an exciting agenda here in front of you today, and I hope this is the start of a renewed interest in some great things to come in this corridor. Thank you.
So we'll be taking questions after the next two presenters. Next up, we have Patrick Goddard. He is the president of Brightline, the first privately owned and operated intercity passenger rail system in over 100 years. He was responsible for the development and construction of the Florida system and bringing this innovative system to market. He comes from the hospitality industry, having worked in hotel development and operations for Hilton Hotels, Lowe's Hotels, and Rosewood Hotels. Prior to joining Brightline in 2016, Patrick was the president and COO of Trust Hospitality. We'd like to welcome Patrick.
Thank you very much for the welcome. It's wonderful to be here. I'm going to share my screen here. I might ask if you can pull up my presentation. There's an issue with my settings. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's go to the first slide. Many of you are familiar already with Brightline trains, and Bill, thanks a lot for giving the history. Obviously, these are train tracks that have been in place for over 100 years, about 125 years now, and really are the foundation for, the state of Florida and all of the activity around the corridor. We invested, as Bill correctly pointed out, the inception of Brightline began in 2012. In 2017, we completed the construction of phase one, which was Miami to West Palm Beach, and we commenced operations in early 2018. And although we shut down operations in March of 20 as a result of COVID-19, we look forward to reopening later on this year. During the time that we've been closed, though, we've been busy at work enhancing, how our operations are going to return. And of course, we've been advancing all of our construction between West Palm Beach and Orlando. We'll have invested over $4 billion into the corridor. The portion between West Palm Beach and Orlando is 53% complete, and we expect to complete that by the end of 2022. Also in 2022, we expect to open additional stations in the cities of Aventura, a project that was sponsored and funded by Miami-Dade County, and an additional station in Boca Raton. Between both of these two stations are equidistant from our existing stations. So those both will open in 2022 as well. So we're very excited about that, and we're exploring an expansion beyond the Orlando airport, where our terminal currently is in Orlando, to continue out to Tampa with a stop in Disney. So very, very excited about all of these opportunities. And as Bill mentioned, we're bringing Tri-Rail into the downtown station. All of that infrastructure is complete. We're just waiting to get completed with positive train control implementation on the corridor for us and for Tri-Rail. So all of that is very, very imminent. So looking forward to getting reopened. I'm not going to go back through the history here, but at a high level, there's been discussions about commuter rail on this corridor since well before I showed up. And we have had this dialogue ongoing with predominantly Dade and Broward more recently about this topic for, I think, more actively over the last 2 years. If we go to the next slide, the project itself, many of you are familiar with. It's essentially 5 additional stations between the existing station of Miami Central and the planned station of Aventura. We're progressing with the county. We're making excellent progress with them. I think that, what we've realized is this is a project, as well as Broward, and we'll talk about it in a second, that you know, and again, the FTA have been quoted saying this as well. This is a viable project. This is probably one of the most ideal corridors for commuter rail implementation. You've got an existing rail corridor, an existing disturbed corridor. So from an environmental perspective, it's simple to implement. We're really just adding platforms and some additional infrastructure to be able to handle the capacity. So we've got the framework of a deal established with Miami-Dade County, and Broward County's deal is going to look very similar to this, but it's essentially our motivation is to, you know, essentially we're looking to create more connectivity to our system. There will be an access fee involved for Miami-Dade County in lieu of them investing the, you know, billions of dollars that we invested into the corridor. We're essentially leasing capacity on the corridor to the counties to be able to utilize that capacity. And, you know, in addition to that, there'll be a capital cost because we're going to have to build some stations, buy some trains, and improve the infrastructure. And finally, someone's going to need to operate it. We're fairly agnostic about operating the system. And, you know, we know Tri-Rail, we agree with Tri-Rail. We think that there should be a combined regional operation so that people understand that this system and the Tri-Rail system are interconnected. We need to make it easy for people to live a car-free lifestyle and move from system to system. So let's go to the next slide, please. This is where we are with Miami-Dade County. We've done a mountain of work over the last year and a half with them, including ridership studies, RTC modeling. We've gotten consultants involved in NEPA. We've been working on design. We've developed track charts. So this is progressing very well. What we're getting to now is sort of where the rubber meets the road. And, you know, Bill alluded to this the last time everybody focused on this. I mean, this project has been brought to almost the finish line on a handful of occasions. And in many occasions, it died under its own weight or under its own complication. This is why we're attacking it one county at a time. Starting with Miami-Dade County. But we're at a point now with Miami-Dade County where now we need to figure out where the money's going to come from. And I think the fact of the matter is that right now there is not a better opportunity to be able to do this. All of the stars have aligned. You know, we're in a position to have these discussions right now because we've completed the infrastructure improvements for our system. There is a willingness and a desire on the part of the county to do this. We're coming out of a pandemic and, you know, somewhat of an economic crisis, and there's no better way than infrastructure to kickstart the economy. We've got thousands of people moving into the South Florida region. We need to figure out a mobility solution for them. I-95 cannot get any wider and cannot take any more capacity. And we've got the ability to move, you know, thousands of people every hour up and down that north-south corridor. So really the time is now. And that's what's most exciting about this discussion and getting all of these people in a room together, or a virtual room, if you will, together to talk about this important subject. So next slide, please. Broward, you know, is a little bit behind Miami-Dade, a couple of months, but we've engaged now with the county. And, you know, I want to thank, and going back to Miami-Dade, you know, Jimmy Morales and his entire team and the previous administration before him, you know, everyone's working tirelessly to make this happen. It does take a village to make these things happen. And similarly in Broward, you know, Bertha Henry and I have been talking about this for a long time. She's been, you know, a leader on this initiative along with Commissioner Furr. There's been a lot of, you know, there's a lot of thought and time and effort that goes into selecting the station locations and thinking about the service levels. And, you know, we've got to also collaborate with the freight railroad to ensure that none of this impacts their business in a negative manner. So Broward is in good shape, but a few months behind Miami-Dade County. And of course, we have a significant opportunity in Broward. We've got the New River Bridge crossing that needs to be now, you know, that we can no longer put any more trains on, and therefore how trains cross that waterway is critically important. And I know others will speak about that today. You know, it's important that we allow marine traffic to traverse the New River. That's an important component of the Broward economy. So ensuring that we create a crossing for trains that is conducive to the marine community. Continuing business as usual is critically important. So FDOT commissioned a PD&E that started at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and that's well underway. And they're working in an expedited manner to try and catch up with Miami-Dade County. But again, it'll be a similar arrangement with Broward, whereby they'll pay an access fee to use the corridor. There'll be a development cost for the improvements, infrastructure, platforms, and rolling stock, and then an operator will need to be selected. But obviously, there will need to be synergy between Miami-Dade and Broward. And although we don't want to combine the two projects and the two negotiations, because I think that that's how it, we kill a project like this, there does need to be some level of coordination in terms of what this ends up looking like and how it operates. And clearly there will be economies of scale, with Broward joining Miami-Dade on things like rolling stock and repair facilities and headquarters and other sort of fixed overhead. The more stations and real estate that's spread over, the better. And if Palm Beach is able to join as well, that would be, that would obviously make that even more economical for the other two counties. Let's go to the next slide. So really, our view is there's a ton of momentum, and this is just a rendering of what one of these stations might look like. There's a ton of momentum for this project right now. There's a lot of interest from the business community and leadership, from many in the business community. We've got obviously Randall Vitale with the on the Broward side, and we've got folks in Miami-Dade County. I mean, there is a lot of interest in making this happen for the community. People want to see this system for moving their employees around, moving tourists around, and just generally kind of creating better transportation options aside from getting into your car. This is a moment where really all of the stars are aligning in terms of funding. We know there's going to be a T&I bill that's going to be a once in a generation T&I bill. And that's the opportunity to make a project like this a reality. So as a region, we truly need to get ourselves organized in order to take advantage of those dollars. We just flip to the next slide, please. So, we've got a phenomenal case to make to both Tallahassee and DC and on why these types of projects are critically important at this time. And we all need to work together to articulate that vision and that benefit to the region. We, as the owner of the passenger easement on this corridor, stand ready to collaborate with all of the different groups that are on this call and in this meeting today to make this happen. And as a private entity, we are able to make some things happen a little faster. We are very focused on, trying to get this delivered in a timely manner. We're prepared to roll our sleeves up and handle, everything from planning to construction to design. So, and again, our view here is this is an excellent time to try and capitalize on this. It's going to bring jobs. It's going to bring environmental benefits to the community. It's going to increase people's quality of life. We're going to provide access to environmental justice communities. It's going to improve mobility generally for our communities, which is critically important to our economy and its continued success. So, we're here to facilitate this conversation as best we can as the owner of the passenger easement. We think there's no better time than now to do it. And we stand ready with our resources to try and make it happen. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Mr. Goddard. So our next speaker, Stephen Abrams, is Executive Director of the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority, which operates Tri-Rail. Stephen is a proponent of public transit because he's a product of public transit, having grown up riding buses and trains in downtown Philadelphia, and now is a regular Tri-Rail rider for the past 10 years. Steve has a 30-year record of public service, including as mayor of Boca Raton and Palm Beach County Commissioner, where he served as the first county mayor. We'd like to welcome Mr. Abrams.
There we go. Thank you, Paul. You read that just like my mother wrote it. We are glad to be part of this workshop on Coastal Link, formerly known as Tri-Rail Coastal Link. And we're assuming the designation has changed because the system is now, as Patrick said, being negotiated separately by each of the counties directly with Brightline, which is understandable because the counties have the potential funding sources. But the Brightline, or rather the Tri-Rail Coastal Link vision, which was embraced by the 3 counties originally, should remain, and I trust will remain the same. So what is the vision? On the next slide, we see the original system map for Tri-Rail Coastal Link. And we've seen some other maps, and we'll probably see some during the course of this presentation. They're all similar with different graphics. But let me go through this one because here you see the 2 parallel South Florida rail corridors. The line on the right is the FEC corridor. The line on the left is the South Florida rail corridor, which Tri-Rail operates on. And most people think these are 2 separate parallel corridors, but in fact, they are interconnected. So at the very bottom of the slide, you see that white bar, and that is the Iris connection at 79th Street in Hialeah. It's the crossover that Tri-Rail will use to go into Miami Central Station. Then at the top part of the slide, you see another white bar. That is an existing crossover in West Palm Beach at Northwood. And then in the middle, the sort of the squiggly orange represents the planned crossover in Pompano Beach. So the Tri-Rail Coastal Link vision is for one interconnected, one-seat commuter rail service. So thanks for the next slide. And in addition to that, we would say should be one operator and one brand. I mean, that's Tri-Rail's main interest and focus in this. After all, Tri-Rail operates the existing system and has done so successfully for over 30 years. The Tri-Rail Coastal Link vision assumes that Tri-Rail would operate the connecting system under the Tri-Rail brand. I mean, it is still called Coastal Link, so it should link to something. That something being Tri-Rail's existing service. And there are many obvious reasons for this. Here are some. First and foremost, to avoid rider confusion. I mean, getting people to ride transit is hard enough without having to confuse them with different train logos or names. We've all ridden transit in cities like Washington or Boston where you have a red line and a blue line and a green line. So can you imagine if they had separate operators or even different branding? Second, one operator will help preserve one-seat rides. Multiple operators or even different branding could mean that riders would have to switch platforms or trains. Every study and just common sense tells you that deters ridership. We already have a 2-seat ride that we are seeking to eliminate with getting into downtown Miami with Downtown Miami Link. Currently, you take Tri-Rail to Metro Rail transfer and you get off and get onto Metro Rail, different operator, to go into downtown Miami. We are replacing that with the 1-seat Downtown Miami Link ride. Nobody would want to just create another version of a 2-seat ride on Coastal Link where you might have to take Tri-Rail into downtown and transfer. So I think folks are pretty in agreement on that. And then thirdly, on this slide, one of my favorites is no need to create a duplicate bureaucracy. So as we've heard, Miami-Dade County is the furthest along in negotiating with Brightline, but Broward is next. And I can assure you, from being from Palm Beach County, there will be some Palm Beach County envy soon following that. And Palm Beach County will be in the mix. And so as the other counties join the system, you would need to have a public entity to implement system-wide policies and protect the interests of each county. The SFRTA board is that entity, already in place, already staffed, and with the rail expertise. On the next slide, we have, last but not least, that it would cost less to run the system under the Tri-Rail flag. Tri-Rail can leverage our existing contracts and workforce with only marginal increases. SFRTA charges no management fees, no markups for subcontracting services. So what do I mean by that? Take it from me, there's more to commuter rail service than just running a train up and down the tracks. Who will patrol and maintain the stations, address rider complaints. On the grants, we talk about wanting to fund so much of this using federal grants. They are highly competitive. They are very specialized to write and to administer. So the question then becomes, would the counties add staff to do this, absorb it? Would they outsource to private consulting companies? These are tests that SFRTA already performs. And then finally, it will be more convenient and cheaper to use Tri-Rail's Hialeah yard for both train storage and maintaining equipment instead of finding a site, building a new one, or sharing the yard with another separate operator or maintainer of equipment. So finally, combining it all into one, then the Coastal Link vision, or if you want to change the name back to Tri-Rail Coastal Link, and the Tri-Rail Coastal Link vision is for one operator, one brand, for one interconnected, one seat ride commuter rail service. The counties will get to decide the operator and the branding of Coastal Link. We stand ready to assist the counties to complete a fully integrated system. And the result would be a true regional commuter rail, not a fragmented system that all of us taxpayers, visitors, and riders can be proud of, that would address the issues that Patrick and others have raised previously, which is to relieve traffic congestion. Already, Tri-Rail takes the equivalent of up to one lane of traffic off of I-95 each and every day to continue to get our everyday workers to their jobs and students to school, and to address the issue of climate change here in South Florida, where we certainly are ground zero. 70%, transportation is 70% of the oil barrel. And if you're going to reduce the carbon footprint, you should be looking very seriously at expanding your rail network. Rail is the only mode that actually takes cars off of the highways. So as with the others, we stand ready to work closely with you to see this come to fruition. And I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Abrams. So, Chair, like any good rail system, we are running right on time. If we have any questions from our SEFTC members, I'd like to invite them to go first, and then we'll go to the audience.
All right, now I'm just listening, Paul.
Mayor Pinto? So,
Yes.
do you have any questions for our previous panelists?
I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to share those questions right now. There's a lot of good information being put forth. I think the presentation that was just made by Mr. Abrams makes a lot of sense. And my question will be, once we get beyond this workshop, if in fact we wanted to move with a strategy to bring to fruition what he proposed, which I think makes sense on the surface, what would be those next steps? So.
Is that a question to me or Mayor?
Well, it's a rhetorical question. I don't expect you to answer it now, but something we ought to have some thoughts on, and certainly offline we can have more detailed discussions on what that would be.
So, thank you, Mr. Pinto. So, sorry, Mayor Pinto. So, Mr. Abrams will follow up with Mayor Pinto on that point. I'd like to turn to the audience now. And for those asking questions in the Q&A, I'd like to ask that you please introduce yourself. Our first question is for someone who needs no introduction. This is for Mr. Abrams. So Mayor Josh Levy from Hollywood asked, when will SFRTA Tri-Rail start running train service at downtown Miami?
Well, thanks, Mayor, for the question. Patrick alluded to that in his presentation. Really, we're working through two issues. One is finalizing the acceptance of the platform that was constructed for Tri-Rail's use at Miami Central Station. But the larger one is awaiting Brightline's completion of installing their positive train control system. This is a federal mandate that was imposed on all the railroads, including Tri-Rail, that I know that Brightline is working very diligently to complete. It's a costly and complicated GPS based collision avoidance system that has to be in place for them as the host railroad, whereupon Tri-Rail would be a tenant on their system and then would have to go through its own testing to satisfy the Federal Railroad Administration that our system was interoperable, our PTC system was interoperable with theirs. So, as I said, working very assiduously to complete that as soon as possible.
And we have a follow-up question from Mayor Levy, which is when does it look like we'll be beginning the Broward negotiations?
I didn't hear that.
When will we be beginning the negotiations for the Broward portion?
Oh, that's not my question.
I can try and answer that question. How are we doing, Mayor Levy? So it's ongoing. So we signed an MOU with Broward County, I think towards the end of last year. And the commission has initiated and Commissioner Furr might, piggyback on here and add some color, but there's an appraisal underway, which will help us value the corridor. The PD&E, which is being conducted by FDOT, and they're going to talk about that process, I think, as part of this presentation a little bit later on, is underway. And part of that exercise is to do ridership studies, identify station locations, and also it's evaluating the different methodologies of crossing the New River Bridge, including, either a tunnel or there's 3 different bridge options that will go over the New River. So the process is, we're expecting the process is going to, I think by the fall, our hope, and I'll put it out here, is that we're pretty close on finalizing the economics of the Broward deal. Broward also needs some air rights, which we're helping them to obtain from the freight railroad to enable some of the other transportation solutions that are being proposed in that county. So that's kind of part of this as well. But, to answer the question directly, Mayor Levy, I think we're in the negotiations, we're in discussions. Once we get appraisals in and station locations, we can actually start to speak about economics in earnest. But the goal would be to have a more material or substantive MOU or pre-development agreement in place by the fall. Commissioner Furr, you see it any different?
No, we're going to be covering that in just a few minutes, all the decision points that we're going to need to go over, all the different planning, et cetera. So Mayor Levy will cover a lot of that in just a minute. Okay.
And while we have Patrick Goddard unmuted, there's a question for Brightline. What is Miss Sue Levin? Is Brightline looking to extend service to the port in Miami?
Yeah, so we've had a dialogue with the Port of Miami for the last year or so. I think we expect, to re-engage with that community, with the port after the summer. Obviously, one of the industries that was most impacted by the pandemic was the cruise industry. And as they start to think about how they're going to restart, we're going to re-engage with the port on negotiations. The good news is there's already infrastructure from the Florida East Coast corridor across Biscayne Boulevard directly into the port that's being used by the freight company today. So adding the infrastructure and placing a station, are things that we've already discussed with the port. So we know it's feasible. We know what the economics are. It's just a question of timing.
Thank you. And then I have two similar questions from Mayor Rex Harden and then from Ms. McKibben Turner of Lake Park, which is what support do you need from the municipalities along the corridor in order to keep this project moving and going forward?
So, I mean, the business, so I'm going to sort of answer this, in two ways. You've got the business community, and you have the elected officials or the government municipal agencies that we deal with on a regular basis. And then there of course is the community at large. So and there's they're represented by a variety of different groups. I think there is a lot of support for this project. I think it's very difficult to see any downside, frankly, on a project like this, something that creates more mobility, gets more cars off the road. So I think the local governments need more support in solving funding problems and more guidance on how to do it, because I think there are a number of different programs that are available at a federal and state level. There are also CRAs in certain communities who have money. There are local developers who want to get involved in some of these stations and develop TOD around them. So I think that I said it earlier on, it takes a village to make these systems happen. And it takes a huge amount of coordination and leadership to pull all of these different groups together to figure out how to, design, plan, design, build, fund a project with this sort of magnitude. That's a long-winded answer, but the Reader's Digest version is it takes a village and it takes some ingenuity, creativity, and resilience, and certainly some leadership. So we're working directly with the mayor, right? So Mayor Cava and COO of Miami-Dade County, Jimmy Morales. So we have a direct relationship with them on implementing this system in Miami-Dade. And similarly in Broward, we're working directly with Bertha Henry. And I know Vince Ruddy is going to speak. Vince and I haven't met directly yet, but I know you've met with some of my team and you've just started. So we're looking forward to engaging with him as the chief negotiator for Broward. But I think the most important thing that we need is a capable and engaged counterparty.
Well, Patrick, if I could interject, you might point to your relationship with the city of Boca Raton, where you're building the additional Brightline station. That, of course, I watched that very closely. Was a great example of a partnership between Brightline and a municipality where you work together to obtain a federal grant and to really design the project that benefited everyone. So, a feather in your cap for that. And that really is a model, I think, for how we can work with the municipalities all along the corridor.
Yeah, no, thanks, Steve. And Aventura is another example just like that, where we collaborated to create something, where 1 + 1 = 3. So it is possible. It's, but and kudos really to Mayor Singer in Boca, because he was an engaged counterparty. And, some of the challenges that we have, and particularly now because of the timeliness of the availability of some of this grant money, there are going to be dozens of counties and municipalities applying for grant money. Everyone's going to be after this money as it comes out. And he who is best prepared wins. And, that's what we're trying to do is be the best prepared and put ourselves in the best position for this federal funding. And in order to be very well prepared, we need an engaged counterparty. And that's been some of the challenge we've had, over the years is the interest in this project wanes from time to time, or the focus does. And I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think that as a county, whether it's Broward or Dade, you have a lot of other priorities, and we've just gotten through on the other side of a pandemic, and we have other things that we're focused on. But yes, we got to make sure that we're able to support, as a county, the medical facilities in the region, but we also need to be thinking about the future, and we need to be thinking about the economic viability of our regions for the future. And therefore, we have to be planning for that and planting seeds for when we come out on the other side of this. And I think a lot of us are starting to feel like we're coming on the other side of this. And we need to ensure that we are prepared to capitalize on the opportunities that are going to be presented to us. And as I said, in order for that to happen, we got to have engaged counterparties. We're ready to work. We got to have engaged counterparties on the other side of the table.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. You answered a lot of questions in the chat about funding questions. And while we have you, we're talking about expansion. Ms. Bulfin from the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance asked, where would Brightline be going after Tampa? And if you don't mind, I'd like to make that a two-part question. We have some interested parties who regularly commute to and from Tallahassee. And is Brightline making that inter-regional connection, and then with Tri-Rail serving the intra-regional aspects, how can we make those two systems work together so we can go freely throughout the state and then throughout our region?
Can I get to Orlando first? Listen, these systems are, not uncomplicated to plan, design, permit, raise money for, and build. And, what we're doing now has been 10 years in the making, which is like, record speed for something like this in America. We think about our business as being a service that replaces short haul flights, our medium haul flights, 200 to 400 miles, cities that are heavily populated, that are 200 to 400 miles apart, too short to fly, too long to drive, and generally on congested highways. So, obviously the South Florida segment is a great example of that. Miami to Orlando is a great example of that. South Florida to Tampa is a great example of that. We're doing a project out on the West Coast of the United States between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. That's a great example of that. Chicago to St. Louis. So that's our business. That's the business that we're in. But what happens is when you build a big infrastructure asset like we are, people understand it, they start to look for ways to connect to it. And also, as you expand it a little bit, just like Flagler, right? He kind of got it to Palm Beach, and then it went from Palm Beach to Miami, and then it went, well, now we're in Miami, let's get ourselves down to the Keys. And, in retrospect, that didn't work out so great, but man, I wish there was a train down there now. These are phenomenal infrastructure assets, are game changers, but they're expensive and unwieldy, to sort of deploy in a rapid timeline. Look, I could see us potentially going up to Jacksonville because there's already infrastructure that exists between Cocoa and Jacksonville, and so you could connect, from Orlando to Jacksonville or from Miami to Jacksonville, and that's becoming a growth hub. And we control that corridor. Going up to Tallahassee, there's unfortunately, only a couple of months of the year that you could make that work. So as a private company, making that kind of an investment doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now. And going down along the west coast of Florida and kind of making a loop, which has been another suggestion. Not only is there not enough population on that west coast of Florida to make it viable, it's also a bit of an environmental nightmare to get down there. So, you're kind of in and out of wetlands and waterways. So I think that, getting to the Orlando station and getting out to Tampa meaningfully connects more than 50% of the state's population, and also connects all the major destinations around the state, all the major airports and all the major cruise ports. I think that's a really, really good start. And I think that once we get that stood up and people understand the value of intercity passenger rail, I think there'll be more interest from the federal government and others to make investments alongside of us. Up until now, we've done everything on our own. We haven't gotten any federal assistance, with the exception of some of the grants we've gotten with Boca and Aventura, for example. But everything else we've put in, we've over $1 billion of equity, and we've raised private activity bonds to the tune of about $3 billion. So we've built this independent of any kind of federal handouts. And part of the reason why we closed our operation was because we weren't going to get any CARES money. So, doing this as a private entity, we have to make money. And that's really what's going to drive our decisions for future expansions.
So,
Hey, Paul, Paul,
yes, Commissioner Furr.
can I make a suggestion here? I know we have FDOT coming up and our transportation department and Vince. I'm looking at a lot of the questions that are coming up, and I think they may be dealt with in some of those quick discussions. Just as a thought.
I think you're 100% right, Commissioner Furr. We're going to move on with our next presentation with Jimmy Morales. And I agree, a lot of the questions in chat, if we get to them, they'd be spoilers for our upcoming presentations. So just sit tight, and I promise we hope to answer as many of these live as possible. Okay, so I'd like to welcome Jimmy Morales, the Chief Operations Officer for Miami-Dade County. He was appointed by Mayor Daniela Levine Cava in November 2020 to oversee transportation and public works, amongst other departments. Jimmy is leading major projects, including efforts to expand and improve transit. He joined the county from the city of Miami Beach, where he served as city manager for nearly 8 years. He previously served as city attorney for the cities of Doral and Marathon. Welcome to the stage, Mr. Jimmy Morales.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I'm actually also currently serving as the interim director of the Department of Transportation and Public Works, although I'm hoping in the next week or two to pass that task on to someone else. But it's a pleasure to be here to present. You see our slide starts with what we call the Northeast Corridor. That's not because we don't agree with a Coastal Link rail. Obviously, we think that's the ultimate goal and look forward to being part of that process. But as some of you know, a few years back, the county, the TP PO led by current chair, which expansion was going to go first. And at some point, folks had the wisdom to realize we could move a lot of them forward, maybe not all at the same speed, but we could move, in this case, 6 different corridors forward, through a 40-year funding pro forma, and the SMART plan was born. SMART standing for Strategic Miami Area Rapid Transit. And in fact, we are breaking ground now on the first of the corridors, the South Corridor, which is a bus rapid transit corridor. But so the Northeast Corridor comes from its reference as part of the SMART plan. If you can go to the next slide, please. As you can, this is a little repetitive earlier. Obviously, there's been talk about, this corridor for a long time, going back to 1993 with the transitional analysis. Obviously, when Brightline came along, they were looking to do the platforms, the Miami Central Station. There was a collaboration to work with them to make sure that there were also platforms that could serve a traditional rail system. As has been noted, back in 2019, the county worked with Brightline and agreed to pay $76 million to build an Aventura station, a park and ride lot. And there's going to be a phase 2 that in fact will be a pedestrian bridge over US 1 to go into the mall. And I know we're working with FDOT on that. Just this past March, the TPO adopted a locally preferred alternative of passenger and commuter rail technology for this corridor, which I think is consistent, obviously, with what we're all talking about. And the Board of County Commissioners, who operates, in a sense, oversees the transit department and forms a large part of the TPO, has also embraced both the SMART plan and the support for this. And I know Patrick alluded to a lot of that, and we've enjoyed working. He's very enthusiastic about getting this project done, and we share his enthusiasm and have been moving forward in that regard. Next slide, please. Just to talk a little bit about how we view the Northeast Corridor. Obviously, we have what are the 2 links of Brightline in Miami-Dade County, the current downtown station, and then the Aventura station, which, as you've heard, will hopefully be opening next year. And in between, then running a commuter service in between those two stops with, as you see here, weekday 30-minute headways during on peak, and then our off-peak. Same service hours as our Metro Rail, fares consistent with our transit system, so that it would seem seamless to the person who's got, one of our Metro cards, or a senior who's got the golden passport, and the idea of having park and ride at each station. So that's sort of our proposed operating plan, along with this 13-mile corridor. Obviously, hopefully one day it would go north of Aventura into this great Tri-County region. Next slide, please. We have been in discussions with Brightline since summer of last year. So even during the pandemic, we've been working on this. And while no definitive agreements have been entered into, as we're being cautious of obviously potential funding from the FTA, we've really come forward with a framework that we've talked about in terms of the infrastructure and vehicles, the site work that's necessary, the track work that will be necessary, identifying the stations. Obviously, the locations of the stations is critical, therefore, to the work that needs to be done. Talked about the need for maintenance facility, as was mentioned by Steve Abrams and others. The rolling stock. We have already, again, while not yet sealed by signature, we have come up with a framework for the access fee, as you see set forth there, in terms of the I love some upfront payment, an annual payment for an agreement. And then we are obviously also looking at the operation.
I'm sorry,
maintenance.
Mr. Morales.
Have received. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Mr. Morales. You
Sure.
froze for a second, and we had several questions about the fee and fare
okay.
payment. Do you mind repeating that line?
Oh, I'm sorry about the access fee.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, and it's, as you see it here on the slide, be reflected by the county commission is an upfront $50 million payment.
Jimmy, you froze
Yep.
again when you started talking about the fee. You froze the exact moment you started talking about the fee again.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe God doesn't want you to talk about the fee. I don't know.
Maybe I'll blank my screen. Can you hear me better now?
We can hear. You're good now.
Okay, maybe that's yeah. I was just saying that in a resolution adopted by the commission last year, the framework for the access fee, an upfront payment not to exceed $50 million, and then an annual payment of $20 million for an agreed upon term, I believe, of 30 years. Did I make it through that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. And then the last piece of the O&M, obviously, we have talked with SFRTA. In fact, Steve Abrams and I were talking this week about that. And we've also had a proposal from Brightline. We've made no decision there, but obviously cost is an important factor. And the extent to which, for candidly, SFRTA could assist in keeping those costs low and perhaps even help assisting with financing for such a regional service would be ideal. Next slide, please. The locations for the stations, the commission has identified by resolution some top priority locations in North Miami Beach area around 151st, proximate to where we also have the North Campus of FIU, location in the vicinity of El Portal and in the design district. Those are three that are reflected on the map. We've also asked us to look at some other locations. We've looked at Wynwood Edgewater, North Miami, in the vicinity of 123rd Street, which is a big transit corridor, and the vicinity of Little Haiti. One of the things we did earlier this year is we put out a request for letters of interest from private developers to see if they would be interested in a TOD, transit-oriented development, around one of those potential stations, to give us a proposal. In fact, we have received 6 proposals corresponding to those 6 stations, and we will begin discussions with them. The idea is hopefully not just to have significant transit-oriented development around those locations that will promote ridership, but also potentially that those developers would see to it to provide funding for the stations at those locations. Next slide, please. Sort of a status report. We mentioned the Aventura station will be open by 2022. We have submitted an infra grant application to USDOT for $125 million. We actually they reached out to that yesterday, in fact, I think, in a positive note to get some additional information about our application. So we view that as a positive. I think sometime in May or early June, we'll hopefully get a read from them on that funding. I mentioned the RFLI, that we've received the proposals and we'll be talking to those developers, but some very serious projects that are involved. We will be shortly submitting our NEPA checklist to the FDA and are moving down that path. And Patrick and Brightline were very helpful in that process as well. Obviously, that NEPA is critical not only for potential FDA funding, but even also in our conversations with FDOT, something they need to and expect to see. Next slide, please. Again, show me the money is always a critical piece here in these transportation projects. The funding structure traditionally that we try to look at is 50% federal, 20, and then 25% from the state. We have submitted our letters actually for each of our quarters to FDOT, and hopefully we'll be receiving a response shortly for them to provide the 25% or 50% of the non-federal share, and then obviously a local commitment as well. And we're looking for different ways to even finance that. The commission has been active in trying to create rapid transit zones for TIF funding, et cetera. I mentioned the infra grant, and we are at least keeping the door open to CIG, whether it be a new starts or even potentially a small starts, if we can get costs down to a point, maybe working with SFRTA and others, where it could even be a small start, which again would hopefully mean a quicker process. And next slide. Sort of next steps timeframe. We anticipate the next year or so and plus to be involved with NEPA and project development. We would be during that time period proposing to enter into a pre-development agreement with Brightline to further refine the cost estimates for the infrastructure along the corridor, and the specific locations of the stations will be important to do that. To continue hopefully negotiating on the access fee, assessing affordability, and leading to an access and operation agreement, and then ultimately a project agreement for the designing and building of the infrastructure. We would view an engineering phase from 2022 to 24 with hopefully full funding. If sooner, great. I mean, obviously if we can get the infra grants done, we can get some guidance from FDOT, et cetera. If we can identify other funding sources, and we are going to be very. I think Patrick mentioned, we all understand there could be significant dollars coming out of Washington, out of this new administration, and so we will be actively pursuing those potential sources, but always trying to keep our other options. And that's why we mentioned the FTA small starts process, because it is the project cost here is teetering on that 300 million threshold, and so we're going to keep that process, hopefully that option at least alive, by going through the NEPA and project development phase. Next slide. Immediate next steps in the short term, we're doing a mid-year budget amendment that we'll be bringing to the county commission to basically provide a show of local funding, $30 million to cover activity costs during this project development. We're going to be requesting to enter into project development and preparing the NEPA class of action for the corridor. That'll be keeping us busy in the few months ahead and continuing to meet and talk. I think we meet almost weekly with Brightline to talk about these issues. And next slide. And so, I'll be glad to answer any questions. Obviously, we look forward to being part of a regional service. I mean, we all know that that in the morning the traffic heading south, and in the evening it's the traffic heading north among our respective counties. And so our workforce sometimes are your residents, and your workforce sometimes are our residents. And so if we can create this regional corridor, but we believe that the time is ripe in Washington. So we're moving forward on our piece because we've been told by FDA and others that it's viable on its own, but we certainly, I think, in the long term, hope to be part of a regional system. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morales. While Mr. Miller shares his screen, I'd like to introduce the next four speakers. Beam Fur is Broward County Commissioner representing District 6. Previously City of Hollywood Commissioner for 12 years. As an elected official, he has focused on transportation, transit, environmental issues, early childhood education, housing, economic opportunity, and the arts. Chris Walton has been the director of Broward County Transportation Department since 2006. During his time at BCT, Mr. Walton was instrumental in establishing the first express bus service to downtown Miami operated by the agency and the nation's first countywide bike share program, Broward B-Cycle. Vince Ruddy, who just joined Broward County, has over 25 years of experience in technology, infrastructure, economic development, and public policy. He's an experienced negotiator who has worked in more than 30 countries. Steve Braun is FDOT's District 4 Director of Transportation Development. He's a registered professional engineer serving as an important role in the department by improving processes and delivering key projects ranging from complete streets projects to major interstates and bridges. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Beam-Fur.
Beam, I think you're on mute.
You're right. Thank you. First of all, I want to say how much I think this forum and using SEFTC is a really good forum for this. I'm the elected representative from Broward, and Oliver is from Dade, and Fred is from Palm Beach. And I think the three of us probably think this is a perfect forum to be able to discuss this. It's a formal place where we can do this and bring a lot of good ideas here. So I'm thankful for that, for us to be able to do that. I know Bill had mentioned some of the history 125 years ago that the flag lord brought it to Palm Beach. It was on March 3rd of the next year that it got to Fort Lauderdale. And then 42 days later, it got to the shore of Biscayne Bay. 42 days. That's a pretty amazing timeline when you think back. Hopefully we can kind of, that's a tough bar to jump over, but that's something to go for. And then that connected us all. In 42 days, we were all connected. And we were connected for a long time, for almost 50, 60 years. And then we weren't. And so 50 years later, it's nice to see, it was great to see Brightline bring back passenger rail. And now it's up to us to bring back commuter rail. The slide that I believe Brightline had put up showing all the reasons was an excellent slide. It showed the environmental reasons, it showed the economic reasons. It's going to help on workforce housing. It's going to help on so many levels, alleviating congestion, that it is just a no-brainer to make sure that we do this. But now we're not going north to south. Now we're going to be going south to north. And to do that, it's going to take a little bit of planning. So today, you're going to hear from Chris Walton, who is our Broward Transportation Director, about our Broward's roadmap to the future. You're going to hear from Steve Braun from FDOT talking about the analysis that's going to need to take place to determine stations and what the criteria is for crossing the New River. And then you'll hear from Vince Ruddy, who will be talking about some of the negotiations and agreements that we'll need to go over. But I will say it's an exciting time right now for Broward, particularly since the surtax was passed. That has just kind of opened the door for us to be able to make this happen. I've been looking at the SMART plan. Jimmy, nice job there. And being able to look at the details is very helpful. We're in the middle of putting together our own plan. We're going to call it the Brilliant Plan. Well, we're A/Bing that right now. We'll see how that comes out. But I'm excited about the possibilities for that. We're from fiber optic to the FEC. This is a very exciting time. But I think we all know that it's going to honestly, the Brilliant Plan would be when all three of our independent plans get tied together, because what that's going to do is it's going to connect us all. And we are going to rely on having a large ridership. And any transportation plan has to make sure that it's going to places people want to go, and it's getting there. It's people can get there at an affordable price. And by combining all three of our counties, we're going to let our residents get where they're going to get where they want to go at a price that they can afford. And I think that's what we have to offer to each other, all three counties. So next you'll be hearing from Chris Walton, who makes sure that people in our county get from one place to another at a price they can afford. And so I'm going to turn it over to Chris here.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'd like to thank SEFTC for the opportunity to present here. I guess I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about the brilliant plan. Just wanted you to know that in March of this year, Broward County Transit engaged with a consultant to perform what we call a transit system-wide study. And this study, in collaboration with the FDOT PD&E study on the FEC corridor, with extensive public engagement, will define the future vision for high-speed or high-capacity transit in Broward County for the next 30 years. This study has four major components. The first element of the plan will be to define and to identify or separate the corridors into what we identify as they identify as bus rapid transit or rail corridors. They're going to make that separation. If you're familiar with our surtax plan, it calls for 26 miles of light rail and 150 miles of bus rapid transit on 7 corridors. So the first element or the first task is for our consultant to make that separation. And once they do that separation, they're going to rank each of those corridors. And when I say rank them, that means basically ranking them on FTA criteria for funding. So the second task will be to take the top rated bus rapid transit corridor. We're going to take it all the way to NEPA and all the way through 30% design. And it'll identify such, transportation elements along all of the corridors to identify where we should place additional transit investments, such as maybe improved bus service, TODs, parking ride lots. The third element will be take the top rated rail segment through NEPA as well as 30% design. Again, I'd mentioned that we've got 26 miles of light rail, but we don't really know in terms of what comes first, and our plan will help define it for us. Fourth, because of the magnitude of this program, it is just on the rail side alone, it is over a $4 billion plan, and we recognize that rail is new here in Broward County. So one of the things that we're requiring is for assistance in project management and technical support for staff augmentation to help guide us through this long range process. Again, and it's key to understand that this is being done in collaboration with our partners at the Florida Department of Transportation, because we recognize that what happens on the FEC is directly related to the rest of the rail and high capacity network that we have here in Broward County. So I want to move to the next slide. So for those of you, and I know we've got a number of people on the line that, because this is relatively new for South Florida, outside of Miami-Dade, Miami-Dade has had rail for a number of years, but rail in this county, and Broward certainly is new, and for our friends in Palm Beach County, we're just going to quickly walk through a primer so that you'll understand what we talk about when we say light rail, and the differentiation from light rail to heavy rail. And these parameters by no means absolute, because you can find variations in the different rail modes. But typically light rail, the routes are 5 to 15 miles, and they run an average speed of 10 to 30. And they run a little bit slower in the cities because they're operating in mixed traffic at civil speeds. And station spacing is typically a mile to a mile and a quarter mile to a mile. And frequencies are 10 to 20 minutes and much faster during peak service hours. Commuter rail is what the focus of this session is. is really, I think, going to be the game changer for our 3 counties. I think, as has already been stated here, we've got the ideal corridor. I think, you know, when you look at the number of cities that the FEC bisects on the East Coast, it's a natural rail corridor. And what we will see on this corridor, or what is typically seen in commuter rail, is that it has what historically has been more of a system that will, like if you look at Miami and some of the other cities where you've got a central core, and it typically would serve suburban employees coming into the core. Ours is more north-south, and we've got a number of different cities along the corridor, so it'll be a little bit different in that respect. But it will also require a bit wider spacing of stations to allow the heavy locomotives to get up to higher average speeds, which typically run between 30 and 50 miles per hour. Station spacing is generally 2.5 to 5 miles, and the system frequencies are typically around 30 minutes at peak. High-speed rail, much different, much longer routes, much higher speeds, and station spacing is much greater, typically 25 miles plus, and frequencies generally are an hour apart. I think it's important to note that, you know, what we've identified here in red is that our station locations will consider these specific mode factors in how we actually evaluate and place our stations as it relates to the commuter rail. Again, as I mentioned, none of these are absolutes, but these are generally accepted design principles and practices for commuter rail. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our partner, the Florida Department of Transportation, Steve Braun.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. And as Chris said, we're a fully engaged partner in this with Broward County. And we appreciate the opportunity really with that partnership. As Chris mentioned too, this project's a game changer for the region and obviously for the county. But in addition to the partnership with the county, we again appreciate the opportunity to work with all the stakeholders on this call, as well as other stakeholders with a keen interest on this project. And I think previous speakers have covered this timeline, so I'm not necessarily going through this. You know, Bill Cross gave an excellent overview of really some of these key milestones in the history of this project. But of note, and he had mentioned it in 2014, you know, that request to go into project development through FTA at the time was put on hold. And I think for us, the more recent, maybe a smaller game changer was, you know, in January of this year, signing that memorandum of understanding with Broward County, defining our role and Broward County's role in managing this phase of the project development and environment study. So a lot of the history in that timeline sets the stage for the study. Again, partnership between the department and Broward County. I'll just spend a few minutes here just talking about the roles we're playing with Broward County's roles as well. So again, DOT is leading the PD&E study. We have a team of consultants on board, really engaged in that management and the technical engineering and environmental analysis of commuter rail on the FEC line. Again, one of the primary focuses of a project development study is to maintain eligibility for federal funding. And as a lot of speakers have already mentioned, public involvement, engaging the community, stakeholder coordination is a big part of this. So DOT is taking the lead on the primary public involvement, and then Broward County, you know, with their relationships at the municipal level and at the county level, are taking the lead on stakeholder outreach and also outreach related to the station locations. Additionally, Broward County, you know, was touched on before as well, track access and ultimately the operations and maintenance discussions as well. And funding, I'm not going to necessarily touch on here. Vincent will get into that after I present, but that's a key element of Broward County's responsibility as part of this study, is identifying the financial plan and you know, putting that approach and strategy together for capital and O&M costs. So again, you know, that long timeline really over a decade of work, but for me, this slide really helps really identify to all of you truly where we are in this process, which we're excited on. You know, steps 1 and 2 were outlined in all those bullets earlier. You know, the planning, the overall big picture plan for the region, a lot of that work has been done through those previous studies, through those previous efforts, as well as even some level of technical work that will feed into where we are now, the project development environment study. And it's exciting in the sense of this table where you see the next step really is design and construction once we hone in on the preferred alternative and all those agreements that were mentioned. So again, I mentioned the partnership, but other agencies involved, you know, Federal Transit Administration was mentioned before, the lead agency. And I'll touch on it in a second, you know, one of the key elements of the project, as we all know, the crossing of the New River. And so the US Coast Guard is a federal cooperating agency. And then across the bottom there, you'll see all the agencies involved, municipalities, keen interest, obviously, the various MPOs, obviously this group with SEFTC representing 3 MPOs, key stakeholder as well. And just quickly, the steps below there, you know, at the bottom, developing alternatives to meet the needs. We're embarking on that now. We're collecting data, the environmental analysis, the costs, the public engagement, ultimately with a recommendation for a locally preferred alternative. So we've seen these limits, but I just wanted to really just focus on the limits of the Broward County study. And again, the key elements of the study I mentioned, the crossing of the New River, identification and recommendations for station locations. And then a key element as well is the east-west traffic analysis for both the crossings at railroad and roadway crossings, and also at the station locations. Just quickly on the stations, you know, this is from some FTA and Urban Land Institute guidelines on station identification, transit-oriented development. So I know we're running a little bit late on schedule here, so I'm not necessarily going to go through these, but I think the key here is station location, looking at land use, economic development, the connectivity, as Chris mentioned, to that broader system plan and some of the premium transit routes in that plan. Ridership potential at different locations, and then walkability and connectivity, and then obviously parking as well. And then just reiterating Chris's point, just on kind of the sweet spot of the station locations, you know, that 2.5 to 5 mile distance between stations. I mentioned before the previous studies, one of which was the feasibility study for the New River crossing, which sets the foundation going into this project development environment study. This was completed in 2020 for the legislature. Extensive stakeholder and agency coordination in this feasibility study. Again, key considerations there, marine traffic, freight, and also passenger operations all being maintained at that location, and optimizing, you know, the mobility of those different functions. The existing Bascule Bridge for freight remaining. So the feasibility study looked at, and you'll see on the right-hand side there, 4 alternatives, which again set the stage going into this PD&E study of 2 Bascule bridges, a 21-foot and a 56-foot mid-level, an 80-foot high-level bridge, and then also the tunnel concept. So again, this PD&E study will be conducting the outreach, the environmental and engineering evaluation of those 4 alternatives as we move forward into PD&E. So just briefly, our project schedule here. Yeah, in general terms, you'll see there key elements from the engagement perspective. We're collecting data now, so we are working with local municipalities and other stakeholders on data collection. And we're on that cusp of really getting into the heavy technical analysis to gear up for August of this year, a broader public outreach event, what we'll call a kickoff meeting. That evaluation will continue, and then early next calendar year, a public workshop. And at that time, we'll have recommendations that maybe will be presented to the public, get feedback, refine those alternatives, and produce the technical documents and some of those agreements that need to be in place to move forward, the financial plan, access agreements, and so forth. So I'll hand off to Vince now. It's been great working with Vince. He's new at the county, but he's been extremely engaged in this project, and we appreciate his role. Vince is going to touch on the project funding and financing.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. We're running a little bit over time, so I'm going to try to make this brief and save time and answer questions at the end. But the county, as I said earlier, is leading the financial planning aspect of this project for the Broward portion anyway. And one of the things on this slide is really, I want to start from the bottom and go up, really start from the private sector. We've already heard from Brightline, the leadership there and the investment. There's other investors. Really encouraging to hear that Miami-Dade has received 6 proposals from developers looking at transit-oriented development around potential stations. We plan to do similar things here. Our key up in Broward is to move from a more ad hoc approach to the structured, deals and package opportunities, which will be a lot easier to do once we get a little further into the PD&E study. I saw one of the questions, I believe it was Javier Betancourt, made a really good point about the need to consider alternative or different modes of financing at the local government level. And he's spot on. We are planning to do that. And to do that, it's going to require leadership by the county and close coordination and leadership with the municipal governments, including the various options listed here, special assessments, TIF funding, joint development. There's the area is ripe, these new station areas, the whole corridor will be ripe for P3 and other alternative delivery approaches. So we're looking forward to helping to put that together, come up with a game plan and facilitate that process, because the more local funding, the more private funding that goes into this, the better we'll be, the more attractive our proposals, our grant applications will be to the federal government. And as far as the approach is concerned, it's, as pointed out here, we're going to need to have a highest possible local funding commitment. The FTA requires at least 50% funding from local sources in order to achieve just a medium score. And there will be competition, even with the new infrastructure bill, assuming that passes. We assume that there still will be a lot of competition and the need to put forward a highly leveraged proposal. Next slide, please. A lot of people think that the penny for transportation, the surtax that would pass, solves all the problems. It actually doesn't, unfortunately. And it's positive. It helps improve the prospect, and we're certainly excited to make use of it. But the surtax budget was predicated on 26 miles of LRT, 7 BRT corridors, and this particular commuter rail project was not actually included in the original financial plan. We're not going to be able to sacrifice the east-west connectivity. Those other corridors I just mentioned, they're going to be important. They'll actually increase ridership for the Coastal Link project. So we need to make sure we can cover those with the surtax money. And for that reason, as I said earlier, leveraging the counterpart funds from other local governments and private investors will be absolutely essential. Last point on this slide is the importance of cost-effective approaches, and that's going to become relevant when we talk about the new river. I know there'll be other presentations on that topic, but just to finish, remind everybody that the FTA's cost-effectiveness breakpoints that they use for grant application evaluation, combined annualized capital and operational cost per trip, if it's between $4 and $6, you'll get a medium score. Sorry, $6 and $10. You get a medium score, and you need to be medium at least to go to the next stage of consideration. I think we should be aiming for a medium high score, somewhere between $4 and $6 combined capital and operational cost per trip. And to do that, we're going to have to be very disciplined and careful not to embrace overly expensive, overly complicated technical solutions and design solutions. It has to be cost effective. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Commissioner Furr and look forward to questions on the financing side afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Vince. So where that leaves us at is we have a number of decisions we need to make. Patrick had mentioned, it's important to have an engaged partner. And I think what you're seeing here is a lot of engagement, not only by the county, but by FDOT, our entire transportation, MPOs, But we're trying to take this as a holistically. We want to make all the decisions to kind of together because one decision affects another. We are working hard to get the aerial easements, and I think Patrick had mentioned we're getting close to that. Track access fee is going to be dependent on some real estate appraisals as well as how much our investment is. You know, how much are we putting in, and that will depend on how, you know, some things like how we get over or under the new river. Operator selection. I loved hearing what Steve had to say about with Tri-Rail maybe being one of those partners. Identifying the stations, I think that is fairly imminent. We should be able to, within, I think if I saw Steve's timeline, that's probably within a couple of months. And so we're closing in on some major decisions that's going to allow us to go forward. I think all of us sense and feel the same sense of urgency, knowing that you know, that money may be coming down the tracks, and we want to be at the platform to welcome it. So with that, you know, I'm looking forward to other, you know, questions and answers. And thanks, Chris, Steve, and Vince for helping out on this. Appreciate it.
So thank you to both sets of panelists. So we just had two very informative presentations, both at different stages in the process. Since we have the Broward County folks on, I'm going to ask a question directed to them, and then we'll go towards a much broader one. To expand service, we have a question of, do we need to expand the number of tracks that are running along the corridor?
That's a question really for Patrick, but my understanding is yes.
Yeah, I can elaborate if you like. So yes, the existing infrastructure is designed to accommodate 36 passenger trains and up to 24 freight trains, running at a certain on-time performance metric, so higher for passenger, a little bit lower for freight. And that's the standard upon which the existing infrastructure has been built. That's what's determined the number of crossovers. That's how the signaling system has been configured. So if you're going to add, you know, and what Jimmy talked about in terms of the schedule plus Tri-Rail, you know, another 40, 50, 60 trains to that, you got to create additional areas where trains can pass each other. You also need to get trains off the main line as much as you can, so that if there is an issue or an incident or a problem at a station, you're out of the way. So the answer is there essentially, if you just dropped in the 50 additional trains to the existing infrastructure, it won't dispatch. You won't be able to run trains on time. You won't be able to run them at their optimum speed or at the maximum track speed. And therefore capacity needs to be added. We have sort of soft circled somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 million or less in Miami-Dade for that. And I expect that Broward will be in a similar neighborhood minus the bridge. So, you know, assuming it has the same number of stations, you know, 5 or 6 stations, Broward corridor is a little longer than Miami-Dade. So there may be a little bit more expense in Broward just because, you know, there's more real estate. So that's to be determined once we determine the station locations. And, you know, we have to confirm that they want the same frequency as Miami-Dade County. But assuming that, you know, they're similar, it'll be similar. And then you got to add the bridge to that. And just to explain, and touched on it earlier, the New River Bridge is a bascule bridge and is unfortunately, you know, we've got very, very tight criteria there with the marine community and with the Coast Guard to enable the, you know, efficient passage of marine traffic. So there, we can't just drop another 30, 40, 50 trains because that would mean that bridge would be closed most of the day. So we're already at capacity in terms of the amount of times we can close that bridge. And that's why we're looking at a new river bridge. So, you know, depending on what we build there, that will drive the cost around that. And that will be additive to the infrastructure needed on the existing corridor.
Thank you. So now this is for all of our panels. We have a lot of questions come up about station location and choosing stations. And these questions have come in from listeners from Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. And I know that each area might have a slightly different answer because of where it is in the process.
So if you like, I'll take a crack at it because we've been interfacing with both counties, and then, would love to have others, contribute to that. Obviously, there's a process, a different process happening up in Broward, but, as you all know, this project has been studied for a couple of decades, and correspondingly, there are some pretty obvious places where stations need to go. Some had been identified in previous studies. Some locations had been identified in previous studies. So that was one part of the criteria, is like where were we already looking? Where had space already been created for stations and parking? So that was one piece. I think another piece was, is there enough distance between stations? So, are they on top of each other? Is there at least, 3 miles, 2 to 3 miles distance between each station? Are we putting too many stations or too few stations? Too many stations will impact travel time negatively, right? Too few doesn't serve enough of the community. Then, actual engineering viability of a station. So can we actually locate a station in a place where it's convenient for people to get to park and to access the platform itself? Can we fit the platform in the right of way? We're building platforms on both the east and west sides of the corridor. So we need a wide enough portion of the, and we're building it inside of the right of way. So that has, led us to identifying station locations that actually accommodate platforms in addition to 2 main lines and 2 sidings. So that was part of the criteria. And finally, we looked at, from a mobility perspective, what are the important east-west corridors along the corridor that would interface with this system, so that if you're, if in the future or if presently you're deploying either a light rail system that might go to a port, or a bus rapid transit system that's running east-west, or existing bus systems that are running east-west, how could those interface with these stations? So we really create an interconnected transportation ecosystem. So those were the criteria that we looked at as we studied this with Dade. And then, of course, we conducted a number of community workshops, where others got the opportunity to demonstrate, and we did ridership studies, right? So like you actually did a ridership study. The preponderance of your ridership for a system like this are going to originate within 2 miles of your train station. So we looked at the population density around those stations and those who actually were public transportation reliant in those communities, and then how many jobs you were providing access to at that station. So there's a lot of criteria I've listed there. There's probably a lot more, and they all rank differently in terms of importance. But that's what guided our discussion in Miami-Dade, and that will inform, I think, the dialogue that we expect to have with Broward County on station locations there. So I don't know if anybody wants to add to that, Vince or Steve or anyone else, but that's kind of, I just wanted to get our perspective.
Thanks, Patrick. And Paul, like you had said in the question, right, we're at different stages, and Patrick just touched on it too. So a lot of the criteria he just mentioned, obviously the ones I'd mentioned in the presentation, those are things we're doing now. Obviously, there had been a lot of station discussion in the previous studies, and we'll pick up a lot of that information, update that, work with the municipalities and communities, and really do an analysis based on a lot of the criteria that Patrick obviously mentioned. And then we'll have recommendations on those locations.
So similar question, but the other side of that, while this analysis is going on, is there anything that these cities and municipalities can do to help prepare themselves to meet these criteria, any sort of first last mile connections that can be implemented? What can be done to really prepare these areas for the train?
So some of that outreach has already started with the cities. For example, looking at what plans they have for future parking or other connectivity and things like that. So land use changes, things that are, in motion development, patterns, things like that, that will help us with looking at those criteria. But I think a key, and Chris touched on it, right? The connectivity of those stations to other transit routes, other modes, pedestrian access, things like that. So, we'll be engaging the municipalities along the corridor for that information and just continue those dialogues.
Okay, and we're about to touch on this in the next presentation as far as the technicals, but would anybody like to discuss at the high level the New River Bridge and what that connection means for the entirety of the system?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at it. As mentioned, there was a feasibility study completed last year. What it means to the system, and I think Patrick touched on in his answer to the previous question, maintaining the freight line, the passenger service, and then also the marine industry, utilizing the New River. So it's important from that perspective to understand that, as well as the context of downtown, and working with the stakeholders, on that front too. I think from an operations perspective, it's important to just note that all those uses, right, travel through that what right now would be a constraint on the project.
Hey, Steve,
Paul, I don't know if go ahead.
Can I just piggyback on what you said? I think it's helpful for the broader public to remember something they might not know about, which is that of the different options being considered, it's not being proposed to take the freight trains, which are currently much longer and cause a lot more disruption and delays on some of the crossings. That will stay on its current bridge crossing of the New River. My understanding is that the options being considered in terms of new bridges and or tunnels were, the idea was not to put the freight through those new options, but to keep it where it currently is. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
I think one other aspect of this is the idea that there's probably going to be a necessity to phase this through Broward County. And when I say that, I think you'll probably see a southern phase and then a northern phase, because that crossing the New River is going to take a while. So there's, I think there's some thought to that as well.
So I still have some attendees who have their hands raised. I'd like to encourage you to type your questions in the Q&A. And while that's going on, we have a question specified to Commissioner Furr. Mr. Harden asked, Commissioner Furr indicated station identification within a couple of months. Is that correct?
Well, I'm looking at Steve's timeline. Steve, do you want to handle that?
No, Commissioner, that is correct. The identification, or I'll start back off, right? I think the evaluation, the continued data collection analysis of those station locations is important, and that decision or that recommendation will be in the coming months, in the sense of that drives a lot of the other elements of the project analysis, right? The operational analysis, the traffic analysis, the environmental reviews of those locations. So, and I mentioned before, a lot of legwork has been done leading to this phase of the project. It's really updating a lot of that information and having a recommendation within months. Not to get into too much of the detail, but once we have those recommendations, then we're able to at least advance on other steps of the project with that understood.
Right.
So this will probably be our second to last question. Commissioner Andrew McGee of Pompano Beach asked if there's any sort of fair interoperability being explored between SFRTA and Brightline.
I'll have a crack, and Steve, you can piggyback. I mean, what we're trying to create is a transportation ecosystem. And what we're talking about today are the infrastructure and logistics required to create all of these intermodal solutions for mobility. And those are going to be heavy rail, light rail, BRT, buses, rideshare, micromobility, you name it. And what's going to actually enable a car-free lifestyle in this community, in my opinion, is technology. And technology is at a point now where, and those of you who are not familiar with mobility as a service, really what that is the ability to plan, pay for, and get ticketed for a trip in one place, in one location. That's what is really going to enable a car-free lifestyle in our South Florida community. And I think that there are a number of companies out there, whether it's, IOMob or Move It, or, there's a handful of others. Miami-Dade Transit has actually been, pretty pioneering as it relates to their technology platforms. There remains a discussion for us to sit down and talk about how all of these systems are going to work together and how people can easily, plan trips from their home to their final destination that include all the different modalities that a trip might include, because that's where the friction is. That's why people don't take public transportation, is because they got to, dig around in their pockets for a crusty, dollar bill to, hand over to the bus driver. We got to get away from that. We've got to figure out how to make this a very easy transaction for people. We got to eliminate that friction. So the ability to plan a trip, the reliability of those trips, the cleanliness, the experience that we deliver across all of the different transportation modalities, that's all critically important. So like the logistics have to be there, the infrastructure needs to be there, the vehicles need to be there, the service levels need to be there, the experience needs to be there, and a critical part of that's going to tie all of that together is going to be the technology. So I would advocate that at some point, as we advance all of these discussions on getting all of these other pieces in place, that we sit down and we talk about how we enable the technology to be able to connect all of these different systems together. It's feasible. It's already being done. The technology exists. We just need to get concurrence amongst us on how we're going to implement it across all of the various systems. We have some solutions. We have some ideas. We have some vendors that we'd love to discuss with others. And from a pricing perspective, then you are able to sell passes, our memberships, our other products that give people affordable access to all of these different systems. Now, that said, from a pricing perspective, Brightline is always going to be priced as a private operator. We are a for-profit business. We are not in the business of moving people short haul for, and we are not subsidized. Tri-Rail, Metro Rail, Metro Mover, whatever we end up doing in Broward, Palm Beach, buses, BRT, those are subsidized systems, and they're intended to carry the traveling public, whether they have access to a car or not. And that's what they're designed to do. So pricing-wise, Brightline, may put some packages together in conjunction with public agencies that are affordable, but the Brightline pricing structure is not subject to the same criteria as public agencies are going to be. So, will there be a product that helps connect all of these things together? For sure. The pricing of that will be determined by which modalities you're going to use. Just like if you rideshare into that equation, Uber is not going to subsidize their fare, but that's what I think we need to work towards.
And thank you, Mr. Goddard. So
if I could jump in just for a second, Paul, because the timing is the commissioner's question is very appropriate. I'll give a shout out to the Broward MPO, which has recently offered a grant to SFRTA to coordinate with BCT, Miami-Dade Transit, PalmTran, which has taken its own initiatives recently. The technology, as Patrick said, is optimum now that we can handle a lot of these transactions in the cloud, so that the coordination can be seamless. If someone, a rider, is able to use whatever they have on their person, as Clinton Forbes always likes to say, the head of PalmTran, whether it's getting that dollar bill out of your wallet, but also whether it's a card pass or your phone or your wristwatch, whatever you have to have that interoperable system, the regional pass. And so we're looking forward to moving that forward with the assistance of Broward MPO.
Well, this is Chris Walton at BCT. We should all be aware that that process has really begun. We have been in extensive discussions with Miami-Dade Transit as well as Palmtran, and we've actually come up with a regional pass that we hope to debut very, very shortly. We through our mobile ticketing as well as the technology that Miami-Dade has, we've already identified fare structures, and we're just going through the approval process through our boards to actually implement that system. Palmtran was a little bit later bringing their technology on board, but they have the exact same technology that we do, so we don't anticipate that incorporating them, at least into the initial phase of the bus system network, will be an issue. In terms of adding the TNCs and things of that nature, those are in development. And Patrick is exactly right. At some point, they all have to come together so that it is actually invisible to the passenger. They just need to go to one app, buy one ticket, and ride anybody's system in South Florida. And really, that's where we're headed. But the rudiments are already in place.
Thank you, Mr. Walton. So I'd like to keep us on time, and I see Mayor Dean Trantalis on deck. So we prepare his presentation. Okay, Mayor Dean was elected to the city of Fort Lauderdale in 2018 and was reelected in 2020. He previously served on the city commission representing District 2 from 2003 to 2006, and from 2013 until his ascension to the mayor's office. He represents the city on the Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization, the County Tourism Development Council, the Broward Workforce Development Board, and the Florida League of Cities, and the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance. Thank you, Mayor Trantalis, for joining us today.
Hey, good morning, and thank you for having me. Who's that handsome devil on the slide there? Must be my evil twin. So I want to thank you all for inviting me here this morning, because I think it's important for Fort Lauderdale to, certainly be a part of the continuing discussion regarding the Coastal Link. Wanting to achieve greater options for mass transit has always been a goal for our community, and I know South Florida. And the idea of a Coastal Link, honestly, just a couple of years ago, we thought was a pie in the sky dream. But now that all these stakeholders are participating in this discussion, we're excited to see something come of this as each city tries to become a part of it, especially some of the smaller cities are looking for station stops. And the idea of adding more trains to the train line to accommodate passengers is welcome news, because anyone who's going on I-95 or any of the other major roadways know for sure that we need to add this Coastal Link to our Southeast Florida region. So as part of that discussion, and I know many of you have heard me before, so some of this is going to be a little bit redundant, but I come to the table to discuss some of the options that we have here in trying to accommodate this Coastal Link. Adding, I don't know, maybe 35, 40 more trains per day to the existing travel routes are certainly going to frustrate a lot of the east-west travel, such as the vehicular travel on Sunrise Boulevard, Broward Boulevard, and Davie Boulevard, and as well as on the New River, totally frustrating the upstream industry that is such an important part of our community. And we're very concerned about how adding those trains, while with the best of intentions, is certainly going to produce unintended consequences, which we're going to look to avoid. So as this discussion continued, the Florida Department of Transportation suggested that we consider a bridge. And we looked at the options of a bridge. And I've looked at bridges throughout the country and throughout the world, and just felt that putting a bridge through the city of Fort Lauderdale would certainly have a lot of consequences, which we are not willing to accept. For example, the train tracks alone create a divide through the city that this city has suffered through many, many decades of separation of demographic populations that we're trying to overcome, and trying to bring Fort Lauderdale into one community. To build a bridge would further cement that division between those who live on this side of the tracks and those who live on the other side of the tracks. Also, it cuts right through our redevelopment area. We have major new construction taking place right along the railroad tracks. And to build a bridge would place this the structure right up against many of these new structures, including a new government center that we're looking to build right there, just south of the Bright Line station. So a bridge is just not an option in our minds. So we've been trying to see if we could consider other options, such as a tunnel. And the first response we got from the Florida Department of Transportation was certainly jarring, to say the least, being told that if we wanted a 3-mile tunnel, we would have to consider spending $1 billion a mile. I went and looked around myself. I spoke with a number of contractors who build tunnels throughout the world, and they thought that those numbers were totally out of whack. In the meantime, we've now spoken with the boring company. The boring company has come to Fort Lauderdale. We've been out there to Las Vegas and to Los Angeles, where they've begun some tunneling projects, and that trip included folks from the FEC Railroad. It included folks from the county, myself, our staff, and we all went out there to check it out. I think we came back with some a realization that putting a tunnel through the city to bring the tracks below grade is a very, very viable option. In fact, is probably less expensive than building a bridge. And I know we've looked at all the different levels, the 24-foot bridge, the 56-foot bridge, and the 80-foot bridge. But the reality is that it's still a bridge, and it would cut right through the city. And I think that what we're learning now going forward is that tunnel design is actually a concept that we need to incorporate in other things as well. For example, having spoken with the boring company, we're now considering putting a tunnel between the area of the Bright Line station and Fort Lauderdale Beach, completely eliminating all the traffic and the encounters one would have trying to get to the beach by putting a tunnel right through Las Olas Boulevard from one end to the next. And these are options, and these are opportunities that not only my city, but other cities are looking into as a result of the boring technology that the boring company has now been able to create, bringing the cost of these projects to a fraction of what were originally anticipated. So for example, we're looking at a train tunnel that would probably cost somewhere between $200 and $250 million for a 3-mile tunnel, which is significantly less than the $1 billion a mile that we were told by Florida Department of Transportation. So we're happy to work with all the stakeholders to see how we can make this happen. But the reality is, this is the 21st century. We need to start looking in a 3-dimensional pattern, not just thinking that we need to keep the same approaches as the only options that we have here in terms of trying to build our cities. Whatever we do today is going to impact the next 100 years, the generations to come. So we have to do it right the first time in order to be able to build the city in a way that is sustainable and makes sense for the community and those who are going to take the passenger rail. We think it will enhance the rail system. We think it'll improve the productivity of the rail system. And we also think that ridership would be appreciative of the fact that we'll be able to avoid a lot of instances that could happen if we kept this rail system at grade level. So we're excited about the opportunity. We're excited about continuing our dialogue with the boring company. We're probably going to make an announcement soon as to a tunnel that is not related to the tracks, but is the Las Olas tunnel that I just described. And but we understand that there's more to it in building this train tunnel, but we're very, very pleased to be able to work with all the stakeholders to make this a reality, because we really feel that this is the way to go. And my commission is in agreement with that. And I believe that the majority of the county commission is also in agreement with this approach. So I appreciate being able to speak to the folks today, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mayor Trantalis, for that enlightening presentation. So now we're moving on to our penultimate speaker, Nick Uren, he's the Executive Director for the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency. He has been in that position for the past 8 years. Nick works for 21 locally elected officials to collaboratively plan, prioritize, and fund the transportation system for the 1.5 million people of Palm Beach County. The Palm Beach TPA annually allocates over $650 million to projects and services that advance the vision of a safe, efficient, and connected multimodal transportation system. Nick Uren, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Paul. And thank you everyone for persevering this long. I think the participation in this workshop has been fantastic. I'm going to touch on, as a closing, the northern end of the region. And if we can jump to the next slide, I do want to mention several people have said, hey, how does this work? Why isn't it a regional corridor? Click one more time, and we'll just highlight the FEC line, I believe. Right. So what I wanted to say is this is a regional transit system that we are seeking to advance. There are a lot of discussions that occur at the county level because that's where a lot of our funding for transit investments is derived. But we are working collaboratively with all of the partners, and it's exciting to have 5 transit agencies on this slide. We've got PalmFan, MDT, BCT, we've heard from Tri-Rail, and we also have Brightline. And so it's really a public-private partnership that we are working on. And we're trying to do this all collaboratively to serve our shared constituents, our shared customer base. If we can jump to the next slide. I want to talk briefly about some of the things that have already been happening or are upcoming in the Palm Beach County portion of the region. We're going to touch on the northward crossover. We're going to talk about what Brightline is currently doing in Palm Beach County. For those of you who think Brightline is sitting on their haunches because you're in Broward and Miami-Dade, that's far from true. The activities are phenomenal. The work that they're doing is excellent. And then some things that we are in discussion on. And so we'll go to the next slide. Just as a reminder, for those who are unaware, we do have these 2 parallel railway tracks, the South Florida Rail Corridor, which is owned by the DOT, and the FEC Corridor, which is a privately owned railway. And there is a connection in West Palm Beach. The northward crossover was recently completed by DOT, which is an excellent construction facilitating interaction between the 2 corridors and allowing for extension of trains that are operating on the Tri-Rail corridor to get into northern and eastern Palm Beach County. Also connected to the Brightline layover facility, so we've got access to both corridors and some of their key infrastructure investments. The Tri-Rail layover facility that's going to be constructed in the near future is just to the northwest of here. And that was a great example of a public-private partnership because we had contributions from both the railways, the federal government, the state government, and even some SFRTA funding. If we can jump to the next slide. The Brightline double tracking is happening right now on the existing FEC line between West Palm Beach and Cocoa. And just like you recall, a couple of years ago in Southeast Florida, most of the crossings were under construction. There was lots of activity in the corridor. All of that's happening in northern Palm Beach County right now. The 26 rail crossings in northern Palm Beach County are being upgraded also to establish the ability to designate the corridor as a continuous quiet zone, and the TPA is a funding partner for that effort. And I guess one of the things I want to mention, and I just want to give as much recognition as I can to the Brightline project, is I had the opportunity to drive to Orlando yesterday on the 528 corridor. The investment in rail infrastructure on the south side of the 528 corridor is unprecedented. It's literally something I didn't expect to ever see in my lifetime. It brought a tear to my eyes of driving along the corridor, thinking we've never made an investment in America in high-speed passenger rail like what is being constructed along the 528 corridor. They're actually pursuing or have obtained permission to construct it as a class 7 track, which means there can be no grade crossings, no at-grade crossings along the entire corridor. So that allows them to get up to that 125-mile-per-hour speed. The construction, the overpasses, the tunnels, it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal, the private investment in mobility that's being made here in Florida. And I just wanted to make sure that we sing the praises of that decision, that process that has resulted in this opportunity for connectivity in Florida. Let's go to the next slide. Boca Raton Station, we've had a lot of talk about this as an example of what cities can do to position themselves for additional passenger rail service. 2 points I want to make sure that people are understanding. The first is the stations that are being serviced by the Brightline by the Brightline trains are not cheap. They're $46 million. In this case, I believe Aventura is priced at about $60 million. In this case, it was a public-private partnership. Brightline contributed $20 million. The city's contribution was in the form of land, and a key component of that land was a continuously accessible frontage along the railway that was at least 1,000 feet long. So as all of you cities are thinking, we have space for a station, keep that 1,000-foot length in mind. That's the kind of distance that the rail service is looking for in order to be able to designate your portion of the corridor as a stop. The city also contributed $10 million toward the construction of that station. And then the city and Brightline were able to partner together on an application for a discretionary federal grant, the CRISI grant, and they were awarded $16 million to fully fund the construction of that project, which is expected to commence later this year. Next slide. There's been discussion of a potential Palm Beach Gardens station. I will acknowledge that the primary discussion has been on the side of the city at this point, but the city has included it in their adopted mobility plan. And we've also included that station in the TPA's long range transportation plan, making it eligible for various federal and state funding resources. City has also adopted a mobility fee, which allows them to capture some contributions from new development as they are permitted within the city, and that can be used as a potential capital funding source for the construction of a station. The city has approached Brightline about this proposed station. It's about 9 miles north of the West Palm Beach station, and so it's a little bit shorter distance than what is the established target for the interim or infill stations in Boca and Aventura. And Brightline hasn't made any agreements to this at this time, but it's certainly something that the residents of northern Palm Beach County are interested in as a potential quick hit introduction of additional rail service in the northern part of Palm Beach County. And let's go to the next slide. And ultimately, I think what we've heard is that conversations are advancing rapidly in Miami-Dade County, and they're advancing rapidly in Broward County. And part of the reason for that, not the entire reason, but part of the big reason for that is that both of those counties, through their voters, have chosen to collect a transportation surtax that allows them to have locally designated or designated local funding to advance projects and provide capital and operating dollars for projects like this. So one of the key next steps in Palm Beach County is to facilitate and continue the discussion about whether we want to follow suit. And I've noted here on this map of Florida, Hillsborough County had established a transportation surtax. It was just repealed by the state Supreme Court, but I expect them to continue that conversation and to pursue redesignation or re-implementation of that surtax in the future. Orange County put that conversation on hold in 2020, but I expect them to pursue it again in either 22 or 24. Pinellas County was on track in 2020 and postponed the discussion in light of the pandemic, but they expect to pursue that again in 24. And the conversation for Palm Beach County as we seek to integrate ourselves within the region is, are we ready for that discussion? If so, what are the implementation steps that we need to take, and what is the timeline for putting that in front of the voters so that we can have a designated local transportation funding source that can allow us to advance things like FEC commuter rail, proceeding into project development, design, and ultimately construction and implementation. And I think that's going to wrap up my component of the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Uren. So we're about to wrap up. We have a few minutes left for some questions. We have about 6 unanswered in chat. Mr. Simon, I see that Nick responded to you personally. I guess overall, since we're coming at the end of this, since the transition, how do we see ourselves teeing up for federal funding? Just overall, or is this a question that's going to take more than 2 minutes to answer?
Well, if I'm the last speaker, I can give it a shot, and then we can let the folks to the south supplement my response. But I think the primary way to do that is to know what you want to build and to have local funds to put forward as a match for any requested federal assistance. So if the Biden administration expands the menu of options, the opportunity for earmarks or the discretionary funds available through a capital incentive grant or a capital investment grant through the FTA, the counties that to the south that have local funding available to pledge as a matching for construction are going to be well positioned to secure those dollars from the federal government.
I'll just add to that with what Nick's saying. We have to know exactly what we're asking for. We have to know where those stations are. We have to know how we're traversing the river. And without answers to those questions, we can't go much further. So those decision points are urgent, and we need to make decisions.
And this is Jimmy Morales here in Miami-Dade. When one of the challenges is and Patrick and I have shared this frustration on conversations, is that FTA is very cautious about and warning, don't enter into binding commitments, don't get too committed early on. And yet, obviously there's a dedicated line here that we're not talking about building or buying right of ways or things like that. It's a dedicated rail line, and we have to deal with the person, and we want to deal with the entity that has the easement there. And they're critical to making those determinations of where the stations are, what's going to cost and whatnot. And how do we walk that fine line of going far enough to give bright line comfort that something's going to happen and getting all the information we need, but not going so far that we jeopardize the federal dollars. It's quite a tightrope, and we're sort of walking it right now, but it's not easy.
So that being said, we have about a dozen speakers on here. We have another 200 people in chat in viewing this with an interest in this. Many municipalities, 100 miles of rail. How do we get everyone together, rowing in the same direction? What does that look like?
Well, I do think SEFTC is a good place to begin. It is the one formal place where we can have this conversation for all three counties. And to that end, when we're talking, earlier we were talking about rail passes that traverse all three counties. To have that seamlessness, you have to have a conversation and a formal structure to be able to do those things. And I think we're doing that. I know I heard Chris mention earlier, that was a recommendation of SEFTC earlier. We have to, my concern, and I don't know if Dean is still on here or not, but big questions like figuring out the bridge or the tunnel, that has, we're going to need help I think from FDOT to help us determine, what's really viable and what's not, and what are the real costs. Or we need help in figuring out the best way to approach that. Without those answers, I don't know how we go forward.
Yeah, Beam, can I piggyback on your suggestion, which is a good one, and just say that, I agree that SEFTC is a good forum to kind of bring stakeholders together and coordinate on such a regional initiative. I think that SEFTC, I don't know, I haven't looked at your website recently or whatever materials you have, but I believe there's quite a bit of confusion out there because of the complexity of this project, and providing information that kind of distinguishes between Tri-Rail and this, Coastal Link project, as it's being called, that makes it clear, who the players are, what their current roles are, and potential future roles. Like it's, people talk about Brightline as if it's going to run the service, and Patrick made it very clear that they're agnostic about whether or not they're going to run it. There's offers from Tri-Rail. Brightline may or may not be willing to do it. Making it clear to the public that there's decisions like that, like the operator, that still haven't been made, and just making sure that they can see, maps like the one you have up on the screen now that show that this is a corridor parallel and very close to an existing corridor that Tri-Rail is currently running operations on, but with different characteristics. I think in particular, though, the one final suggestion I'll make is the expectations at the municipal level with local government about their ability, the potential for a station in their jurisdiction, their vicinity, it has to be tempered. And I think we all need to, if we're going to be talking about commuter rail, make sure we remind people that this is not a light rail project. It's not bus rapid train. It's not the kind of things that accelerate and decelerate so quickly that you could have stations right next to each other, a half mile or less, or at that level. So making sure people understand that this is not the only transportation mode that will benefit them as part of the broader county plans that are being developed, whether it's SMART plans or Broward's upcoming plan, and just getting that information out so that people will make informed decisions and contribute to the stakeholder engagement process in constructive ways.
And thank you, Mr. Wright. I saw that Mr. Vitale I'm going to give him the last comment before we transition to the closeout.
Thank you, Paul. And Vince, looking forward to working with you. Congrats on the new role. I want to add to what Vince just said. You know, in Broward County, there seems to be a lot of parts, and perhaps the way to suggest a path forward would be, and this kind of came up through one of the questions in chat, is to get some type of MOU in place, a memorandum of understanding as to who has roles and responsibilities. Because if you're in this business, this topic deeply, then you have a clear understanding as to who does what, and you know, all the acronyms, and this is a plan, or this is in place, or this is a historical study, et cetera. But the vast majority of the people have no idea, whether that's an elected official or even less so the business community. And so Commissioner Furr, I know the county's been taking a strong lead on this, but maybe there's a way for a larger group to have an MOU in place where we kind of divide up responsibilities and engage some of the business groups as well, not just the workshop, but other groups as well. So that would be a suggestion as a takeaway for next steps.
And Randall, just so you know, there are MOUs out there right now with Brightline and with FDOT that are kind of dealing with most of the things. But I think your suggestion is a good one, if and where we can do that, because the business community has a huge role in this. So absolutely. Paul, can I ask one last question?
It's your meeting, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. And this is to Steve, and Steve and I, if this needs to wait offline, that's fine. But the question I had about the New River, and I know that is part of the study that you're looking at, that is going to be looking at that. Is there anything that you need from either Broward or from SEFTC or from any of the MPOs that would help on that? Because it seems like we need a combination of engineers and value engineering, all that kind of stuff, to know what is really possible. How can we help on that, or is that totally in? Go ahead,
Commissioner. Thanks, for putting that out there. And you had touched on it earlier, right? A big part of this partnership, and it's in our MOU, between the department and the county, is the technical expertise, right? That the DOT is committing to this project. So I think part of this evaluation that goes into the project development environment study is looking at multiple alternatives. As I mentioned before, we have several alternatives that are at least the starting point for that technical evaluation. We have been working closely with, the mayor mentioned his staff. I attended a forum, hosted by the city with the boring company. We have reached out through the city and directly to the boring company for some information to better understand the technology and so forth. So I think we're still, again, in that data collection phase, again, working with the city. And, I think at a future point, we'll take up your offer and really reach out through these respective stakeholders and talk through, the approach at the New River. And I think part of that was really just trying to get, as I mentioned, just a better understanding of the boring company technology and the potential, for other uses. The mayor mentioned, and the boring company interaction that I had at that forum, there was a lot of discussion on first and last mile connections, right? Connections, to stations, right, between hubs, things like that. So, it's interesting really just to think about that maybe as a much more bigger picture transportation option as well. So
thank you, Steve, for answering the commissioner's question. And so today we've heard from many speakers that are all talking about their section, but everybody's come back to what I think is the most important part, which is this regional planning, this regional collaboration. And that's what I'd like to invite Miss Eileen Bouclé to bring us home with, is a brief discussion on that. And what we might actually end up doing is, because we haven't really expanded on the regional coordination, is do a follow-up to this in about another 6 months at another SEFTC meeting, just a status check on where we've come from here and where we're going. So now I'd like to cue up the slides for Ms. Bouclé, who's the Executive Director of Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization. She joined the agency in 2016 and has helped provide mobility choices for the residents of Miami-Dade County through her local transportation planning process, and more specifically, the Strategic Miami Area Rapid Transit Plan, the SMART Plan, an infrastructure program of projects that aims to significantly improve transportation mobility in Miami-Dade County and the South Florida region. Ms. Bouclé, please bring us home.
Well, good afternoon. It was a pleasure listening to all of the speakers and really participating in this engaging discussion. I agree that we're ending this discussion with a highlight and focus on how we can continue our regional efforts in unifying and pursuing funding at the federal level, state level, also our public-private partners, which have been at the table today, our business sector, which have also been at the table today. There is a slide that I've been asked to show everyone that I will ask to be put up, which is basically the funding opportunities. But before I walk you through these, I would like to comment on the issue of that regional coordination and how is it that we can accomplish that and how we can do a better job there. And I'd like to tell everyone that even though in Miami-Dade County, we have what we call the SMART Plan, when we meet regionally as SEFTC and work collaboratively as a region, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade, we refer to the plan as the SMART region, because 4 of our 6 corridors, including this one, is truly regional and goes not only up to Broward, and 3 of the 4 go up to Broward, but also the 4th one reaching all the way to Palm Beach and also down south to Monroe County. So it's not just a SMART plan, it's a regional plan. And in order to avail ourselves to any of the opportunities in front of us in terms of federal funds, my answer to that is we have to be in the federal pipeline. We have to be in the federal process. All of the discussions today, all of the partnerships today are critical. But if we're not putting our components and our phases and our projects officially in the federal pipeline, we cannot pursue these various funding opportunities that not just myself, but my colleagues in Broward and Palm Beach are closely monitoring. So the slide that I've been asked to discuss briefly is basically the funding opportunities overview at the federal level, starting with the President's Build Back Better plan, which includes $621 billion in transportation infrastructure and resilience. Most of you are familiar with the capital investment grant programs in USDOT. The budget request currently pending for fiscal year 2022 is a 23% increase from last year's fiscal 2021 program. And last year, the total amount was approximately $2 billion. And those funds remain available until September of 2024. And essentially, the $2 billion umbrella is broken down into the next bullet, the New Starts program, of which 1.2 billion is dedicated to the Federal Transit Administration New Starts Capital Program at the federal level. 525 million are for core capacity projects, which are available to all 3 counties as a region. 200 million is set aside for the Small Starts Capital Program, and 100 million is dedicated to expedited project delivery. Moving on to the Infra Grant Program. This was a discussion that was taking place earlier at the regional level. We had an opportunity to apply for just under $1 billion, approximately $900 million worth of infra grants. Those applications were due in March, and we discussed them locally at the county level, but also collectively at the regional level to see what might be eligible. What we're currently looking at is the second to last bullet, which is the raise capital grant program, formerly known as BUILD. It's approximately $1 billion and available for capital investment opportunities up through July 12th. And what's interesting about this particular grant program is that they're looking for projects of local and regional impact and significance, and which our project that we focused on today clearly has a regional impact. So we can see a lot of our Smart Plan, Smart Region projects actually fall into certain categories of these federal funding programs. In addition, there are opportunities at the state level. As was mentioned earlier, the state has the counterpart to the New Start, Small Start component, and does offer opportunities for participating in one half the non-federal share, if in fact we are in the federal pipeline and following the federal process. And last but not least are the surtax allocations, which was placed here on the slide for the purpose of reminding us that as a region, our local investment really is what signals, our local funding commitment and local investment really signals to the state and federal partners where our priorities are, because without our local commitment at the table, we really can't leverage or seek the state and federal funding partnerships, which we are so highly focused on. And at this time, I'd like to just conclude my comments. I think the workshop that we've had today has been outstanding. Many topics have been covered. I welcome an opportunity to continue engaging on not just this project, but the other regional projects that we'd like to pursue. And any questions or discussions, I'll be happy to stay in the chat room and continue. Thank you so much and appreciate everybody's participation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bouclet. And while those questions are rolling in, Mr. O'Reilly, if you'd like to say a few words while we sort through our questions.
Well, I'm really happy to be here, Paul. I appreciate it. Like some people said earlier, I've been here for the long haul. I've been involved in this project since I think its inception. I would like to say a couple of things. I'm deeply involved in the project, and we said back several years ago, it kind of collapsed a little bit under its own weight. Miami-Dade and Brightline are to be congratulated for getting this revised and getting so close in Miami-Dade County. I really urge them to go as fast as they can. And Broward, you know, we're involved with that to do our best to catch up. We will work closely with the community, with the business folks in Broward as the Broward effort keeps on going as quickly as it can. A lot of the work has been done. We need to do the outreach. We need to solve the crossing at the new river and how that's done. We have the technical horsepower on our team to do that. If they're not there, we will bring them in either nationally or internationally or whatever is needed. And we need to solve that. And we need to solve that crossing. And I think we will do that in the next coming months. And then we all need to work towards getting that implemented. But this project, Broward, Miami-Dade County are so close to the finish line. They've applied for federal grants. They're practically there. So that's great. I don't want to take any backward steps or anything that could stop them or slow them. And then we need to do as quick as we can to catch up in Broward. And Palm Beach County are there waiting, ready to go as well. So that's all great. So I think we're getting closer than we ever have. And let's all work together and make sure we make that progress to get to the finish line.
Well, thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. I don't see any new questions in the Q&A, but if the panelists would like to stick around for a little bit, we'll keep this open for a little while longer. We can end the recording. At one point, we peaked at 234 participants. We're down to 182, so I'm glad that everybody stayed on for these 2.5 hours to talk about one corridor. It was very exciting. So, and with that, everybody have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in 6 months for an update. Once again, thank you to all our panelists, everyone who's stuck around, and all of staff on the back end. We really appreciate everybody's hard work in bringing this together.
Thanks, Paul. Nice job.
Thank you, Paul.
Are we staying on?
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.